My daughter's husband looked me dead in the eyes and told me I was no longer welcome in my own home. My daughter stood beside him and said nothing. I nodded, walked to my truck, and made 2 phone calls. 11 days later, they had called me 83 times, driven to 4 states looking for me, and contacted every person who had ever known my name. They thought they had discarded an old man with nowhere to go. They were about to learn the difference between a man who has nothing and a man who simply has nothing left to lose. Before we go any further, please subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you are right now. The morning it happened started, like any other morning that June. I had been up since 5:30, the way I always am, a habit carved into me by 31 years of opening the school building before anyone else arrived. Old routines don't surrender just because the job does. I had made coffee, watered the tomato plants on the back porch, and was sitting at the kitchen table reading the newspaper when my son-in-law came downstairs. His name was Derek. He was 41 years old, worked in medical device sales, and had a handshake that was always a little too firm, the way men are when they want to remind you they exist. He poured himself a cup of my coffee, sat across from me, and put both hands flat on the table like he was about to negotiate something important. My daughter came in a minute later. Claire, 38 years old. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's smile, though she was using neither of them that morning. She stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hallway, with her arms crossed and her gaze aimed somewhere slightly to the left of my face. "Dad," Derek said, "we've been talking. A lot, actually. For a while now." I folded the newspaper. I set it down. I gave him the same attention I used to give students who came to my office with rehearsed speeches about why they shouldn't be suspended. "The baby is coming in 4 months," he continued. "We need the space. Your room is the only one that makes sense for the nursery. We've already looked at floor plans. I looked at my daughter. She looked at the door frame. I understand a nursery," I said. "I've been thinking about that too. We could convert the study downstairs. Or, Dad." Claire's voice was soft, but it had a wall behind it. "We need you to find somewhere else to live. We've actually been looking at some places. There's a senior community over in Maplewood, the Pines. They have nice units. It's not a nursing home. It's more like apartments. You'd have your own space. The Pines. I had driven past it on Route 14 dozens of times. Beige buildings. A little fountain out front that ran in the summer. A sign with a leaf logo that was meant to suggest something natural and peaceful and did not succeed. I turned the coffee mug in my hands slowly, the way I did when I needed a moment to think without anyone seeing the thinking. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked. Derek placed his hands together on the table. "We want to do this right, Frank. We want to give you time. 6 weeks. That's enough time to find a good place and get settled." 6 weeks. Patricia had been gone for 2 years and 4 months at that point. My wife of 36 years, dead of a stroke on a Tuesday afternoon in February while I was buying birdseed at the hardware store. When I got home and found her, the world rearranged itself into a before and after that I was still learning to navigate. Claire had called me 2 weeks after the funeral and said, "Dad, sell the house. You shouldn't be alone in that big place. Come stay with us. We want you here. It'll be good for all of us." I had sold the house. I had moved into their guest room with my books and my tools and Patricia's jewelry box. I had paid for a new roof the following spring because the estimate came in and Derek's face went the color of old paper. I had covered the groceries every week, the gas and electric every month, the property taxes that spring because they were short and embarrassed about being short. I had paid for the new kitchen floor when the old one started to buckle, and I had installed it myself over a long weekend in October because the contractor quote was $11,000 and I had spent 30 years managing school facilities and knew how to lay tile. I had done all of this and called it family. I had done all of this and gone to bed each night in their guest room feeling useful, feeling like Patricia would have approved, feeling like I was still a father in the full sense of the word. 6 weeks, I said again. Derek nodded. "We think that's fair." Claire still had not looked directly at me. I pushed back from the table and stood up. I told them I would think about it. I carried my coffee out to the back porch and sat with the tomato plants and thought about the fact that I had paid every property tax bill on this house for the past 2 years out of my own checking account, and that my name was still on the original purchase agreement because Claire's credit had not been sufficient when they bought the house in 2019, and that the refinance they had done in 2021 had failed at the last moment because the new lender found a lien issue, and that we had simply left the title exactly as it had been since the original closing. I thought about all of that very carefully. Then I went inside and told them I understood, and that I would start looking at options, and that I appreciated them being honest with me. Derek shook my hand. Claire hugged me briefly, the kind of hug that is mostly obligation and shoulder blade. That evening I called my brother Eddie in Knoxville and told him I might be coming for a visit soon. He said the lake house was open. He said to come whenever I wanted, and stay as long as I needed. He asked if everything was okay. I told him I was working some things out. I spent the next 3 days in a state of quiet that Claire and Derek probably interpreted as sadness, or resignation, or the general fog of an old man accepting bad news. What it actually was organization. I went through every folder in my filing cabinet. I located the original deed. I located the closing documents from 2019. I located every property tax receipt with my name printed clearly at the top. I located the homeowner's insurance policy, which had been issued in my name because I was the one who had set it up, and I was the one who paid the premiums. On the 4th day, I drove to downtown and found a real estate attorney named Susan Park, whose office occupied the 2nd floor of a building on Maple Street. She had a direct manner and a wall of diplomas and the particular patience of someone who has heard many variations of the same story. I spread the documents across her desk and described the situation. She reviewed everything without hurrying. She asked several questions. She referenced a statute I had never heard of. Then she leaned back in her chair and looked at me with an expression that was not quite sympathy, but was something adjacent to it. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "according to everything here, you are the sole title holder of this property. The 2021 refinance never closed, which means the title was never transferred. Your daughter and son-in-law are, legally speaking, residents of a house that belongs entirely to you." I asked her what my options were. She told me clearly and completely. She told me about notice requirements and occupancy rights, and the process for reclaiming a property. She told me that as the legal owner, I had the right to list the property for sale at any time without the consent of the occupants. She told me that once a sale was underway, the occupants would have a legally defined window to vacate. She told me that none of this required cruelty, but all of it required action. I asked her to prepare whatever documents she thought appropriate. I asked her to move efficiently. I told her I would be out of town for the next several weeks and that I wanted everything handled through her office. She asked where I was going. I told her I was not entirely sure yet. I drove back to the house, and Claire was at work, and Derek was at work, and I packed everything that mattered to me into the back of my truck. This took longer than I expected, not because I had accumulated so much, but because I kept stopping to hold things. Patricia's reading glasses in their soft case. The photograph of Claire at her college graduation, her face open and full of everything the future was supposed to bring. The small wooden box my father had made in his shop in 1974, the one with the loose hinge I had never gotten around to fixing. These objects took time not because they were heavy, but because they were not. I left a note on the kitchen table. It said, "I appreciate the honesty. I'll be in touch. The tomato plants need water every other day." Then I drove north toward Tennessee. Eddie met me at the lake house with cold beer and the kind of silence that older brothers know how to offer. We sat on the dock that first evening and watched the light go flat across the water, and he did not ask me a single question until I was ready to answer it, which was about the 3rd beer. I told him everything. He listened the way our father had taught us to listen, without interrupting, without offering solutions before the problem was fully described. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. He said, "Do they know about the deed?" I said, "No." He said, "How long before they figure it out?" I said, "Depends on when the realtor starts showing the house." He looked at me with something that was not quite a smile. I had contacted a realtor named Mark Hollis before leaving town. He had been recommended by Susan Park as someone experienced with sensitive property situations, which was her careful way of saying he had dealt with families before. I had given him a lockbox code for the side entrance, a detail I want to mention specifically because it is the practical answer to an obvious question, and practical answers matter. The lockbox contained a key. Mark could access the property for showings without needing anything from Derek or Claire. I had left them in possession of their locks and their routines and their illusion of ownership. I had simply arranged, through proper legal channels, for reality to begin its slow approach. I turned off my phone on day 2 at the lake house. When I turned it back on 6 days later, the screen was a document of disintegration. 83 missed calls, 51 voicemail messages, a number of texts that I scrolled through without reading all of them, though certain phrases surfaced repeatedly. Please call us back. We don't understand what's happening. There are strangers walking through our house. Dad, where are you? Dad, Dad, Dad. I listened to the voicemails in chronological order, which meant I heard the arc of it clearly. The first ones from Derek were controlled, professional even. The tone he used in sales calls that had somehow bled into everything else. Frank, there seems to be a realtor here. I think there may be some confusion. Please call me when you get this. By day 3, his voice had changed. Frank, I talked to a lawyer. I understand the situation with the deed. I don't know why you didn't tell us. I don't know why you're doing this. Please call. Please. Claire's messages did not change in tone so much as they dissolved. The first ones were careful and measured in the way of someone who has been coached. By day 5, she was not careful or measured. Her voice had the texture of someone sitting on a floor at 2 in the morning. Dad, I know we handled this wrong. I know we should have talked to you differently. I'm not going to pretend the past few months were okay because they weren't. I just need you to call me. I need to know you're safe. Dad, please. I sat on the dock with my phone and the lake in front of me, and I listened to every one of them. It was not a comfortable feeling. I want to say that clearly because I think people sometimes imagine that justice feels like triumph, like the moment in a film when the music swells and the wronged party stands vindicated in the light. It does not feel like that, or at least it did not for me. It felt like grief in a different shape. It felt like the space left behind when something that should have been whole turns out to have had a crack in it all along. But I did not call them back. Mark Hollis sent me 3 emails during that week. The property was drawing strong interest. 2 couples had scheduled second showings. One family had submitted an offer at asking price with a 30-day close. He wanted my authorization to proceed. I authorized it from the dock on Eddie's lake house with my coffee going cold beside me and a heron standing perfectly still in the shallow water off to the left. I stayed at the lake for 11 days total. On the 12th morning, I packed my truck, said goodbye to Eddie, and drove back. I was carrying a box from my truck to the extended stay apartment I had rented downtown when I saw their car parked in the lot. Derek was leaning against the passenger door. Claire was sitting on the hood with her arms wrapped around herself, even though it was warm. They looked like people who had been waiting for a long time and were no longer sure waiting was going to accomplish anything. Frank. Derek straightened up. We found you through Susan Park's office. Her assistant confirmed you were back. I kept walking toward the building entrance with my box. Frank, please. Claire slid off the hood. She looked like she had not slept in several days, which was possibly accurate. Dad. I set the box down on the sidewalk and turned around. You look tired, I said. We've been looking for you everywhere, Derek said. We called your brother, your old colleagues, I know, I said. I listened to the voicemails. Then you know we've been trying to reach you for almost 2 weeks. Yes. His composure, which had held through the parking lot and the opening exchange, developed a fault line. Why won't you just talk to us? I looked at my daughter. She was looking directly at me now, which was something she had not managed on the morning this all started. On the morning you told me to leave, I said, I asked you to look at me. Do you remember that? She did not answer. I asked you to look at me while your husband told me that 6 weeks was a reasonable amount of time to relocate an old man who had been paying your bills and fixing your floors and mowing your yard, and you looked at the doorframe instead. That's what I remember most, Claire. Not the words, just where your eyes were. She made a sound that was not quite crying and not quite speaking. Derek ran his hand through his hair. Frank, we made a mistake. A big one. We handled everything about this wrong, we know that. But selling the house is not the answer. That's our home. That's where the baby... It is not your home, I said. It has never been your home. It is my house, in my name, with my taxes and my insurance and my signature on the original deed. You have been my guests. Good guests, mostly, for a while, and then not guests I would have chosen if I had been thinking clearly about what I was agreeing to. Derek's jaw tightened. You're punishing us. I'm selling my house, I said. That's all. The same way you were making arrangements for my future when you identified the pines on Route 14 and gave me a 6-week window. You made a plan based on your needs. I made a plan based on mine. You can't just sell it out from under us. We have a baby coming. I know. I kept my voice even. I am not indifferent to that. But it is not my responsibility to provide free housing to my daughter and her husband indefinitely, particularly after being informed I was no longer welcome there. You made that clear. I accepted it. Claire took a step toward me. Dad, please. Where are we supposed to go? That is a fair question, and I am genuinely sorry it does not have an easy answer, but it is your question to solve, not mine. You are both employed, both healthy, both younger than I was when your mother and I bought our first house. And the furnace broke the first winter, and we had to make the mortgage payment with money from her parents because we had used everything else on the down payment. You will figure it out, because you have to figure it out, Frank Derrick said. After everything you've... I picked up my box. The closing is in 9 days, I said. Mark Hollis will send you the formal notice through his office. You have that window plus 3 days to remove your belongings. If you have questions about the process, Susan Park can answer them. I walked into the building. I heard Claire say my name once more, behind me, in a voice that had all of her mother's grief in it and none of her mother's meanness, which was the one thing that made the elevator doors closing feel less final than it otherwise would have. The new owners were named James and Renee. They were 34, expecting their second child, and had been outbid on 2 other houses that spring. When I met them at the title company on closing day, Renee had a folder of paint swatches and James kept referring to the backyard as the place where they would put a swing set, the way people talk about futures they have been imagining in detail for a long time. Thank you for accepting our timeline, James said while the title officer organized the paperwork. We know it was a quick turnaround. I have found that the right people for a house have a way of appearing at the right time, I told him. I meant it genuinely. Renee looked up from her folder. Did you live there long? 3 years, I said. Before that it belonged to my daughter. She and her husband are moving to a rental while they figure out their next step. She nodded with the easy sympathy of someone who does not know the full story and has no reason to look for it. I signed where the title officer indicated. I initialed where she pointed. When the final document was complete and the pen went down, the number on the settlement sheet represented 3 years of property taxes and insurance premiums and a new roof and a kitchen floor I had installed on my own knees over a long October weekend. It represented 2.5 years of grocery receipts and utility bills paid from my retirement account while I told myself I was being a father. It represented the selling price of a house I had given my family name to because they needed someone to guarantee it and had been the only option and had not thought clearly enough about what guaranteeing something actually means. It also represented freedom, which is not something you can put a price on, but which, it turns out, sometimes comes with a settlement check attached. I drove south the following week, not toward the pines on Route 14, not toward any senior community with a fountain and a leaf logo. I drove toward the Gulf Coast, toward a town in Florida where a former colleague named Arthur had retired 4 years earlier and had been inviting me to visit since before Patricia died. He had a boat. He had a spare room. He had, as he put it during every phone call, absolutely nothing pressing on his schedule. The drive took 2 days. I stopped in Georgia overnight at a motel that was clean and unremarkable, and I ate dinner at a diner where the waitress called me Han and refilled my coffee without being asked, which is one of the small dignities that cost nothing and means more than people realize. On the second day, somewhere in North Florida where the pines are tall and straight, and the light has a particular quality in the late afternoon, I thought about Claire. I had spoken to her once since the parking lot. She had called on a Sunday evening, and this time I answered. She did not ask me to reverse anything. She did not argue about the house or make a case for Derrick's position or try to locate leverage she no longer had. She said, I know I handled this badly, Dad. I know I've been handling a lot of things badly for a while. I don't expect you to forgive it right now. I just wanted you to know that I know. I told her I appreciated the call. I told her the baby was going to be wonderful, and that I would be there when it arrived, wherever there turned out to be. I told her that I loved her in the way that a father loves his child, which is a love that does not have conditions even when it has consequences. She cried a little. I did not. But after I hung up, I sat in the parking lot of the grocery store where I had stopped, and I stayed there for a while before I went inside. Arthur's house was at the end of a narrow road that curved toward the water and then stopped as if it had lost interest in going further. The house itself was small and painted yellow and had a porch that faced west, which meant the sunsets were the kind of thing people drive hours to photograph. Arthur was waiting on that porch when I pulled in, with 2 glasses already poured and the particular ease of a man who has made peace with his schedule. "You look like someone ran you through a dryer," he said. "Long few weeks," I said. "You want to talk about it?" "Not yet." He handed me a glass. "Fair enough." We sat on the porch and watched the water turn orange and then pink, and then the particular deep blue that comes just before the light is completely gone. And the breeze was warm and smelled of salt and cut grass and something faintly floral that I could not identify. And somewhere down the road a dog was barking at something that probably did not require that much attention. My phone was in my pocket, and it had Claire's contact and Derek's contact, and the message threads that contained 83 missed calls and 51 voicemails. And every text that had been sent in the 11 days had been sitting on a dock in Tennessee, deciding who I wanted to be for whatever time I had left. I had worked for 31 years. I had raised a daughter with a woman I loved until she was gone. I had signed my name to things I should have thought harder about, and paid for things I should have asked more questions about, and told myself that generosity without expectations was virtue rather than the particular kind of loneliness that disguises itself as selflessness. I had been discarded, and then I had reclaimed what was mine, not out of cruelty, but out of the simple recognition that a man who gives everything away eventually has nothing left to give, and that is not useful to anyone, including the people he was trying to help. The sunset finished, the sky went dark. Arthur's dog came around from the backyard and put his chin on my knee. Arthur refilled the glasses. "You fish?" he asked. "Used to," I said. "The bay is good this time of year," he said, "speckled trout mainly. Some redfish if you know where to look." I looked out at the water, which was dark now, and catching light from the houses across the bay in small, scattered pieces. "I think I'd like to learn where to look," I said. He nodded like this was a reasonable position. We stayed on the porch until the night was fully settled around us. Two old men with no pressing obligations and the entire next morning ahead of us, and I thought about Patricia and about Claire, and about the house that now belonged to James and Renee and their paint swatches and their plans for a swing set, and about the way some things end, not with anger, but with the quiet acknowledgement that they were always going to end, and that the only question was whether you would be standing when they did. I was standing. My coffee was good. The water was calm. That was enough. If this story meant something to you, please like this video and subscribe to Pure Revenge Stories. Leave a comment and tell me what time it is where you're watching from. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for being here.